What's up, everybody? Welcome in to the channel. If you are watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe if you're listening as a podcast on the Pump Fake podcast feed. Be sure to do all that podcast stuff. Leave a review. Appreciate you guys for tuning in. Big news of the day is that the New York Jets have released Davante Adams, who is coming off a 85 catch, 1,000-yard season, which may have flown under the radar pretty aggressively, considering the fact that the Jets only won 5 games last year. He was acquired after, week 5, which was basically like, hey, Aaron Rodgers, here's Davante Adams. Please be happy. And they had a few games, especially like in the last month of the year, where it looked like, oh, okay, yeah, there's still something there with these two. That chemistry isn't something that just goes away. And it seemed like this was basically just like, okay, by the time that it was pretty evident that this wasn't going to work. I think that it was just, well, at least we're here hanging out every week playing together. So we'll just try to make the best of it in any way that we can. And, while the Jets didn't have a great year, Rodgers and Adams had respectable years. I mean, I just pointed out 85 catches, over 1,000 yards for Davante Adams on the season. Rodgers had 28 touchdowns to 11 picks. Didn't have a gaudy year in terms of the win category, or, he didn't throw for 5,000 yards or anything like that. But in terms of, a 41-year-old quarterback, it was a very solid year. It wasn't, top 5 quarterback Aaron Rodgers, but it was, still top 12 in the NFL, still in, that range. So, now it comes down to, all right, where's Davante Adams going to go? There were rumors last year that the Steelers were interested in acquiring him. Obviously, that didn't come to fruition. Went to the Jets to be with Rodgers. But now that he's been released, you start to wonder, okay, what would the money side of things look like for him? Because, he's 32. Clearly, on the last few years of his career, compared to other guys around the league that the Steelers could target, who are a little bit younger and you can get a little bit more mileage out of. But if you want an immediate answer to get a guy that could be an immediate number one complement to George Pickens, adding Davante Adams makes a whole lot of sense. The only thing with that is, there's a lot of people who are like, well, if they sign Davante Adams, that feels like a pretty big indicator that Aaron Rodgers would be coming after him. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think the Steelers are going to try to get the quarterback situation figured out this week. It's going to be either Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. Every indicator says that they would prefer it to be Fields. They want Fields. But if for some reason they can't get something done and he hits the open market and signs elsewhere, then it will probably be Russell Wilson, despite the fact that there's a lot of people in the building who aren't too fond of him at this point. But those are their top 2 options, is keeping Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. Although Omar Khan did add during his combine presser that all options are on the table right now for Pittsburgh at the quarterback position. Obviously, one of them went away because Matthew Stafford is staying in Los Angeles. The Steelers reportedly reached out about Matthew Stafford. He apparently had no interest in going to Pittsburgh. So, that kind of tells you the state of the Steelers right now in terms of big name players wanting to go there. In terms of Davante Adams, Ian Rappaport reported that he would, really like to go back to the West Coast, which was, a big thing with him going to Vegas. Is, at the time he could play with Derek Carr and it would be on the West Coast, closer to his family and whatnot. So the team that sticks out to me outside of Pittsburgh, well, let's talk about Pittsburgh first, because obviously it does make sense for them to want to add him. As I already pointed out, they wanted him last year. He went to the Jets. And for an immediate answer, having him opposite of George Pickens, that gives you 2 legit, really good dudes on the outside. And you can focus on trying to find, a third option in the offense. Or even if you want to really double down on the receiver position, you could still take Matthew Golden in the first round to kind of groom to be the wide receiver 1 in the making, especially if you're not going to extend George Pickens, which is certainly a possibility. So even if you would have Adams and Pickens on the roster this year, there's no guarantee that either of them will be there for the long haul, especially Pickens, who, I think that if the Steelers had other options on the roster, if they had a deeper wide receiver room, they probably would have moved on from him already, but they don't have any sort of leverage to do that right now. So if they wanted to, they could sign Davante Adams and draft Matthew Golden to take care of both the present and the future at the position and give themselves, whoever the quarterback is, a lot of options and a lot of weapons on offense compared to last year where they didn't really have anything outside of Pickens in the passing game. Calvin Austin had some spurts, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. But I think if they can go into the season with him being like the wide receiver 4, I think that if he could be DeMarcus Robinson for the Rams, even if he could just repeat what he did last year, I think that's a great spot for Calvin Austin, for him to be like the 4th guy who has like a small handful of games a year where he just goes off for, 5 catches and a couple long touchdowns. I think that's a perfect role for Calvin Austin. I don't want him being the number 3 in the offense. So if they can, this Davante Adams thing, if that does come to fruition and they can get him on board and they can go sign somebody like a Darius Slayton or a Elijah Moore to be the number 3, somebody, for Slayton and Moore who can be both boundary and slot guys. Austin, who would be a slot guy. I think, that's a lot better situation for the receiver room than what they had a year ago. If he doesn't go to Pittsburgh, though, I think the Rams make a lot of sense. That's a team that's going to need a receiver to replace Cooper Kupp, who they're going to be trading this offseason. They've made that pretty publicly known. Cooper Kupp himself tweeted that, they informed me I'm going to be traded. So, wherever he ends up, they're going to need somebody to put opposite of Puka Nacua. Matthew Stafford, obviously going back to the Rams. If you can get Matthew Stafford, Puka Nacua, and Davante Adams on the same offense, combined with, what Kyron Williams in that run game does, man, like that's a good place to be if you're the Rams. And that's something that can make a lot of sense for me. And look, there's going to be, the talks of, all right, is Buffalo going to be in the mix here, which I fully believe they should be. If you're the Bills, if you're Josh Allen, of course you'd want to play with Davante Adams and you'd want a guy there to be your definitive number 1 guy. Amari Cooper is going to be a free agent. Even so, he didn't really pan out the way that they were hoping he would last year. So, if the Bills can make a move, I'm sure that they would like to do that. And if they can add Davante Adams, then that's something that I'm sure that they would explore. But yeah, if you're the Steelers, obviously adding Davante Adams makes a whole lot of sense to put opposite of George Pickens. I don't know, a lot of people will be like, well, he's 32, but, again, he just had another 1,000-yard year where he's still playing really great, a really good underneath route runner, but can still get the deep balls. I think that he would be the perfect, incredibly balanced receiver that would balance out George Pickens really well, because you got Adams who can do everything, great route runner, good deep ball guy. You can let Pickens kind of focus more on the deep ball stuff while Davante Adams becomes that number 1 guy. And again, it's not the only move that they should make. They should still target at least 1 guy in free agency, maybe draft one at some point too. I don't know about the first round if they add Davante Adams, even though I just said the Matthew Golden thing. Look, if they do that, I'm not going to be shaking my fist or anything like that. But if they were to sign Davante Adams, my guess is that they would shift their focus purely to either defensive tackle or cornerback in the first round of the draft, depending on how the rest of free agency goes, if they don't add a top-notch corner. There's a lot of different things that they could do in terms of if they wanted to pick up Davante Adams. But like I said, it's a route that they should explore. Davante Adams said last year himself that he would love to play for Mike Tomlin, which, that's the general consensus of like most guys across the NFL. So you can kind of take that with a little, grain of salt, but it's not nothing, I would say. And not to throw any sort of shade at Davante Adams or anything, but he seems to be more about where can I go for the vibes more so than where can I go to win. Because if he wanted to go somewhere to win, I don't think he goes to the Jets last year. If he wanted to go somewhere to win, I don't think he goes to the Raiders, And I would say the same thing about someone like DeAndre Hopkins. Now, granted, he got traded to the Chiefs last year, but he could have gone to Buffalo in free agency. He could have gone to Kansas City in free agency, and he decided to go to Tennessee because they gave him the most money. And again, not bashing either of those guys. In the NFL, you can make a lot of 2 things, and that's money and memories. And Hopkins chose to go to the place that gave him the most money. Davante Adams decided to go hang out with his boys and make a lot of money, that's fine. But I would strongly take that into consideration when pondering what teams he could land on. Because, like, again, the Rams make sense if he really wants to win a Super Bowl that bad. And again, I'm not saying that he doesn't want to win, but if, like, there's other things that he values on that same playing field, playing for Mike Tomlin, a guy that, you'd get along with, I think that that's something that we could see taken into consideration. Now, they're not a West Coast team. And again, Ian Rappaport reported that he would prefer to go back to the West Coast, which again kind of plays into the belief of, okay, there's other things that he would strongly take into consideration over just being able to win. And again, not bashing him for it, but there's certain places that would make sense for him that might not even be on his card because of location or people there. So something to at least think about when trying to decipher where he could end up. Adonis says, by the way, if you're watching, you want to leave a comment, by all means, go ahead. It's been a year since the Steelers wide receiver room has been destroyed, and it still hasn't changed. I mean, look, man, the new league year hasn't started yet, so they haven't really been able to do anything. They can't trade for anybody until March 12th. They can't sign anybody until March 12th. So give it time. I would say this. I think completely redoing the receiver room is going to be one of their priorities. I don't think it's going to be as talked about as something like defensive tackle, because that seems to be something that they're paying a lot of attention to, or cornerback, because the room last year wasn't good outside of Joey Porter. And even with Joey Porter, I mean, he had spurts where he didn't play well. So, I mean, those are the things that are obviously the quarterback situation, but we're going to know within the week who that's going to be. So, things like the receiver room are going to be off-season long projects that they can't really start actually putting pen to paper on these things until March 12th. I'm only okay with Aaron Rodgers coming to the Steelers if he can play GM and get Tomlin traded or fired. He's not going to do that because Aaron Rodgers, every chance that he gets, he talks about how much he loves Mike Tomlin. So if anything, that's just going to, make it more secure for Mike Tomlin. I mean, Mike Tomlin's not going anywhere regardless. He's going to be here until he doesn't want to be. But no, Aaron Rodgers isn't going to try to get Mike Tomlin fired. I can promise you that. So, in terms of Davante, I think that quarterback situation also matters. I don't know how he feels about Justin Fields, because again, that's very much the guy that the Steelers want to keep. In terms of Fields or Wilson, Fields is by far the one that they want to keep around. It's just a matter of his agent, David Malgetta, who is just notorious for being that bag chaser and trying to get every last dime that he can out of his clients, which, by the way, is why T. Higgins fired him, because T. Higgins wanted to stay in Cincinnati, which, by the way, he got tagged. But T. Higgins wanted to stay in Cincinnati. You don't make a move like that, firing your agent in the middle of big negotiations if you're looking to go elsewhere, because he hired the same agent that Jamar Chase has. So David Malgetta is very notorious for being a guy who's going to try to get every cent out of his clients, and he wants Justin Fields to hit the open market. And my interpretation is that Fields would like to stay in Pittsburgh. He's had a ton of changes every year of his career where it's been a new offense after new offense, offensive coordinator after new offensive coordinator, multiple head coaches. I think that he would just like stability. And having some carryover from 2024 to 25 where, okay, same head coach, same offense. I know the offense. I know all the guys that I'm going to be with. We're going to add some pieces and whatnot, but I know the offense and I know the core of guys that I'm going to have around me. That's not nothing. And while there is probably interest on both sides between Fields and the Jets, if I'm Justin Fields, at least I'm saying, all right, do I want to leave and go to a place, especially the Jets, where, they haven't been good for a long time, no matter what they do, which signifies some instability up top. Do I really want to go there, or do I want to stay in Pittsburgh where, we can all say what we want about the Steelers, and I certainly have, but we know that they're at least stable. You know that you're going to at least get some sound-minded people around you, and it's not going to be like totally chaotic. You're going to have, again, we can say what we want about Mike Tomlin, but you're going to have a good leader of men, stable-minded head coach. You're going to have just a buttoned-up organization compared to the Jets, where I think Aaron Glenn could be a good hire, and I like Garrett Wilson, and their defense is good. But like we said, the same thing with Aaron Rodgers last year, and look how that went. So I just don't think that going to the Jets would be the best for him. And but I would also say the Steelers shouldn't be penny pinchers here and let him walk away for a couple $1 million. If he's wanting X amount of dollars and they're a few million away, then just say, look, okay, we'll give it to you. Because A, they have the money to spend. They can free up a lot more money pretty easily. I would say that TJ Watt extension is going to be coming soon. Nick Fireball reported that for Penn Live that, hey, the TJ Watt extension is probably coming soon. So that, again, that's going to free up some cap space as well. They can restructure a lot of different deals to free up money. There's a lot of different things that they can do in terms of more cuts as well to free up a lot of money. So they can't be penny pinchers here. And I know a lot of people are going to say, oh, well, they're not Super Bowl contenders with Justin Fields. And I would agree with that. But I would also say we know what they are with Russell Wilson, which is 9-8, 10-7. Like we just saw what they did with Russell Wilson. With Fields, you can also say, yeah, they'll probably win 10 games. But you could also figure out, okay, well, is this a guy that is this going to be a Baker Mayfield situation in Tampa Bay where they bring him in? Not a lot of people have a lot of expectations. Then they win the NFC South. They win a playoff game. They very nearly beat the Lions in the divisional round. Like, is it going to be a situation like that where Justin Fields, in the right situation with the right people around him, proves that he can be a starting caliber quarterback? And the Steelers can say, okay, this is a guy that we can move forward with as our quarterback. And look, if he's not, then at least you got pieces in place, theoretically speaking, for whoever you draft in 2026. With Russ, that's basically just waving the white flag completely on the 2025 season and just saying, yeah, this is a placeholder. We're just trying to get to April to draft the next guy. With Fields, he's young. You can at least say, yeah, we're going to try to see if he's our future. Because you know that Russell Wilson isn't. I don't know if Justin Fields is, but I know that Wilson is not. And I think that they have that same feeling too, where it's, yeah, like we want Fields. He's younger. He can do a lot more stuff with his legs, which fits the offense a little bit more. So I do think that there's a lot of credence that comes with the Steelers wanting Fields, and he's absolutely their first choice. Jack says we should absolutely be pursuing Davante Adams. Yeah, man, I agree. And I hope they do, and I'm sure they will. They're going to do their due diligence. Omar Khan, I think, at the very least, is very good at least asking, right? And if they don't get Davante Adams, there's plenty of other guys that they are asking about, have been asking about. The name that I keep coming back to with everything that I write, everything that I heard at the Combine, Courtland Sutton. And that's something that I reported last year that, yeah, they're trying to get Courtland Sutton. They reached out to Denver before and during the draft last year. Denver said no both times. The Rams were the other team, or at least one other team, that reached out to the Broncos about Courtland Sutton. They were turned away both times. But even so, the Broncos didn't end up paying Courtland Sutton, and he's on the last year of his deal, coming off a really good season, and it doesn't look like they're going to pay him. So if you're Denver, you're not going to pay this guy. You're not going to get anything more for him next offseason because he's just going to walk. And in season, you're probably not going to get more for him than you will right now, coming off arguably the best year of his career. So it just makes sense for Denver. If you're not going to retain him anyway, then just trade him and get as much as you can for him. And the Steelers are going to be aggressive in pursuing that. I had people tell me in Indy that, yeah, keep an eye out for Courtland Sutton probably going to Pittsburgh. So that's something to watch for is if they don't get Davante Adams, which, again, I don't necessarily expect them to. I think that, they should be asking and they should, put in feelers and try to get it done. But if they don't freak out because Courtland Sutton's a name that I would expect to land there at some point. So we'll see what comes of that. But that's a name that I would keep a very close eye on, is Courtland Sutton. So don't freak out if they don't get Davante Adams. I didn't go into, once I saw that Adams was released, obviously I was like, okay, yeah, that'd be cool if the Steelers got him. I'm not necessarily expecting them to. I think that, again, he has things in mind in terms of kind of like when you're buying a house, right? Okay, the location, how many beds, how many bathrooms, he's doing that, but with a football team. Okay, where's it located? Who's all there? And look, I'm not going to pretend to know the exact order of Davante Adams' list of wants and what order they go in, but he's going to take those things into consideration. And again, Ian Rappaport reporting that going back to the West Coast would be something that suits him, which is why I say, okay, the Rams would make a lot of sense, because he can both contend and be on the West Coast at that point, play with a great quarterback, another great receiver. Pittsburgh, you don't necessarily have that. So that's why I would say keep an eye out for Courtland Sutton. That's a name that I heard, again, dating back to last year, at a source very close to Sutton tell me, like, hey, he would love to play with Russell Wilson, which is where, a bunch of different whispers started last year around draft time, and the Steelers tried their best to get him, because remember, after they traded Deontay Johnson, they didn't have anybody else besides Pickens on the roster, and I think they kind of underestimated or overestimated just how willing teams would be willing to part with receivers. And it kind of bit them in the butt, obviously, because they were left with Van Jefferson and Scotty Miller and Quez Watkins, who didn't make it out of training camp. So, there was very clear interest in Courtland Sutton. And in terms of him, his situation in Denver hasn't changed because he still hasn't gotten paid. Now, it doesn't mean the Steelers would have to give him an extension if they're going to trade for him. They don't have to, but I mean, if you're going to trade for him, then you're going to keep him around rather than giving up draft capital and just have him for a 1-year rental. But if they would trade for him, I would expect, something like a 2 to 3 year extension that's somewhat front loaded, so you can, pay him for his best years rather than back load it and you're, on the hook for a lot of money for a 33-year-old receiver. But Courtland Sutton's a name that I basically expect him to be a Steeler at this point from everything that I've heard. It sounds like Pittsburgh is going to be really aggressive in this. And again, this dates back to last year where they wanted him and they just couldn't get it done. Those conversations, they're still being had. And if Denver doesn't have any plans to pay him, then you may as well just trade him. And Pittsburgh is going to be one of those teams to watch for. So again, if they don't get Davante Adams, don't freak out, everybody. There's going to be plenty of guys that they can get. Chris Godwin's another one of those names. It was reported that Tampa Bay probably not going to, bring him back. So he's going to hit the open market. Coming off an injury, sure. But, I mean, this is a guy who we've seen play really good football over the last half decade, from when Tom Brady was there and they were winning the Super Bowl, consistent deep playoff runs, to when Baker Mayfield got there and he was the, maybe one of the, 5 best number 2 receivers in the NFL, complimenting Mike Evans. So Chris Godwin is a name that I would keep a good eye out for, and you might be able to get him for a little bit cheaper too, because he's coming off the injury. So it might be, a quick, just 2-year deal, 2 or 3 year deal, depending on how confident you are in his ability to bounce back. I think he's going to be fine. So I think Chris Godwin's a name to keep an eye out for in terms of who could be the 1A, 1B to George Pickens. And if it is Chris Godwin, I'll be ecstatic about it, because I think that he's, a very good receiver. Then again, yes, coming off an injury, but still a guy that can produce. And I'm not, overly concerned about the injury right now. So I think that Godwin would be somebody that would be a great addition. Darius Slayton's somebody that a lot of people talk about. He, obviously not the caliber of a Sutton or a Chris Godwin or Davante Adams, but would be a really good number 3 guy to add, as well as taking somebody else. So if they only add Slayton to the receiver room, hypothetically speaking, I would fully expect them to draft somebody in the first round, whether that be Luther Burden, whether it be Matthew Golden, Emeka Ibuka. Like, they would take a receiver at that point, which, by the way, George Pickens, any of those 3 receivers that you can draft, and Darius Slayton being your, top 3 receivers, that's a hell of a lot better than where they were in 2024. And I would be, pretty on board with that. So, there's going to be a lot of names that they're going to be doing their due diligence on. Nick Westbrook-Akine, another deep threat guy that they could add. And if he's the fourth receiver, I think that's pretty okay. The third or fourth receiver behind the top two. There's plenty of guys in free agency. And again, potential trades. I think Christian Kirk is a name that they certainly will look at. He got hurt last year. There was reports that the Steelers were going to try to trade for Christian Kirk before he broke his collarbone. So they were doing all they could to add a receiver last year. Obviously, it ended up being Mike Williams, who didn't do anything outside of one touchdown grab against Washington. But they were doing their due diligence to try to get somebody. And now I think they're going to be a lot more, steadfast in trying to make sure that that's a priority this year rather than being left hanging with Pickens and a bunch of just C- guys. And look, they still won 10 games last year. Obviously not in the fashion that anybody would have liked. But if they can get some upgrades in the receiver room, and if they get the right quarterback, and I hope it's Fields. I think it's very up in the air whether it will be or not, simply because of who his agent is. But if you surround him with talent, then I like what the offense can be. And look, Arthur Smith, I would bet money wants Justin Fields. I think that he very much enjoyed coaching Justin last year. And that's not to say that Fields is perfect. Him and Russell Wilson obviously have talents that differ. Fields has the dual threat ability, which he showcased in his first and the 6 starts that he was under center. Wilson gives you a little bit more of the deep ball than Fields will, a little bit more consistency in the passing game than Fields did. So each of them brings something different to the table. But, as my good friend from Steelers Now, Alan Saunders, reported, Russell Wilson genuinely pissed some people off in the building with the stuff coming out about his strained relationship with Arthur Smith. That very much seemed obvious that it came from Russell Wilson's camp. And so there's people in the building that are legitimately angry about that and don't want him back. So Justin Fields is definitely the leader in the clubhouse, and Adam Schefter's reported it in Rappaport. Everybody, it's very well known that the Steelers want Justin Fields first and foremost. And if that's the case, they can't be penny pinchers when it comes to who they decide to bring back. They can't, again, be penny pinchers when it comes to a couple $1 million if that's what's keeping them apart. Because if you get the right quarterback and you have guys around the league who like Justin Fields and they say, okay, Justin Fields is there, can go play for Mike Tomlin, I'll go to Pittsburgh. Compared to, all right, it's a 38-year-old quarterback. This team just seems to be kind of stuck in the middle of being bad and good. I don't necessarily know if I want to go there. So a lot to consider there, but we'll see what happens with the Davante Adams situation and what comes of it. We'll see how long it takes once the new league year begins. But there's plenty of teams that would be good landing spots for him in terms of teams that are contenders adding another piece. That would make sense for him. Adonis adds, it's very easy to replace Najee Harris. He's absolutely horrible. I sent some sarcasm there because I've, went into last year after the when they didn't pick up his 5th-year option. I was one of the people. I was shocked. I thought that they would, but I wasn't freaking out about it. I was like, yeah, Najee's not a bad running back, but he's not a great one. Now look, now he's going to hit the open market. I think the Raiders are probably going to be the team that signs him. He'll get $10 million a year. Good for him. I don't wish anything bad upon Najee Harris. I hope he gets paid. I hope he has a good rest of his career. It's not going to be in Pittsburgh. That's okay. But Najee Harris is a guy that where it's not going to be super duper difficult to replace him. Again, not to say he's a bad player. He's a very solid running back, but he's not a top 10 running back. Top 15, sure, but he's not an elite running back. And I think that they can find running backs that better fit their offense. Because I also don't think that Najee Harris is a Arthur Smith scheme fit. He's not a, horizontal runner. He's a very downhill runner. And a lot of the stuff that the Steelers do, the wide zone stuff, that's just not Najee Harris's game. So I wish him nothing but the best. I hope he gets an absolute bag on the market. I hope he does, but it won't be with Pittsburgh. And the Steelers will draft a guy or they'll sign a guy to be the complement to Jaylen Warren. And if they draft somebody like a Caleb Johnson out of Iowa, if they draft Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, Devin Neal from Kansas, all of which I would be fine with. I just don't think Najee Harris is a good fit for the Steelers offense. And I understand, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons. I mean, look, man, a lot of that is, and to his credit, he doesn't get hurt. He's just always there. Never missed a game. And that's great. But across a 17-game season, you have to average on the ground to get 1,000 yards. Let's see, 1,000 divided by 17, like 59 yards a game. Like if he's putting up consistent 1,500-yard seasons, then yeah, sure, we'll talk. But like, I'm not trying to dunk on the accomplishment or anything like that because he's the only one to do it. But a lot of that also has to do with the fact that all the other guys like Nick Chubb got hurt, Jonathan Taylor had a down year with injuries, Christian McCaffrey got hurt. Like he's not on the level of those guys. And a lot of it is just because the Steelers ran the ball a lot more than anybody in the league. Not very efficiently, but they did. And he just didn't get hurt. He got a lot of those carries, and he got a lot of, 60-yard games to help get him to that mark. So I know it sounds like I'm crapping on Najee Harris. I'm not trying to. I just think a lot of Steelers fans severely overrate how good he is. And he's not really a fit for the offense. So wish him the best. I just don't think that he's not going to be some massive, irreplaceable loss in Pittsburgh by any means. So we'll see what ends up happening. That'll do it for today's show. And again, as the offseason goes on, these are going to be incredibly consistent. So Steelers fans, if you're watching, I did this a ton last year, started around draft time. Multiple shows per week talking about the Steelers, and you can listen to it. Last year it was on the YouTube. You can listen to this in the Pump Fake podcast feed, which you can get wherever you get your podcasts. My national podcast, The Pump Fake, it'll be in that feed. So you can catch it there as well. And then later on in the Pump Fake, I'll be doing my free agent predictions. We'll see who we get to do it with me. Probably my good friend JP Acosta from SB Nation. So that'll be a lot of fun. Just predicting where a lot of free agents will land. So that'll be a lot of fun to do. That'll be coming very soon on the Pump Fake. And again, we're a week away from the new league year kicking off, March 12th. And then we'll start to find out where a lot of these, where these dominoes fall, where guys land, and that'll be a lot of fun. I'm sure the Steelers are going to be pretty big players in a lot of that, so we'll be here to talk about it both on the Pump Fake and on Black and Gold Breakdown. If you're a Bills fan, a lot of my coverage in terms of written centers around the Bills, so I started doing a separate Bills podcast as well. Started it off on Patreon, decided just to put it on YouTube just because there wasn't too much success over on Patreon. So now it's just going to be on YouTube. You can go watch Get the Tables, which I just did with Bills legend Stevie Johnson. So go and check that out as well. I'll catch you guys later, both on the channel and in your podcast earbuds. Appreciate y'all for tuning in as always. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please do so. If you're listening as a podcast, leave a review. Talk to you guys later. Have a good day.